कृतमैत्रस्य पत्युजा एव पुंशली. Sang Prabhu, can you read the translation?
Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you.
An anxious woman is very easily carried away by paramour, and it sometimes happens that her husband is violently killed by her paramour. If the yogi gives his mind a chance and does not restrain it, his mind will give facility to enemies like lust, anger, and greed, and they will doubtlessly kill the yogi.
So in the previous verses, the instructions were given as to not trust the mind, right? And the reason for not trusting the mind is given here by this rather stark analogy. So the analogy that is given is that when a wife is unchaste, it's called a prostitute over here, that when the wife is unchaste, but nevertheless trusted by the husband, then she will conspire with her paramours to kill the husband when the opportunity arises. And so similarly, when a yogi will trust the mind, when the opportunity comes, so what are the paramours for the mind? Things like lust, material desires, greed. So when the opportunity arises, the mind will conspire with them and cause the downfall of the yogi. Right. So the instruction is that do not trust the mind, even if it appears to be externally collaborating with you. Still, one should not trust the mind. Right. Like in the analogy, the paramours of the wife may be those relationships may be in secret. The husband may just think that my wife is devoted to me, but if he puts his trust on the wife, then sooner or later it will be the cause of his downfall. Now, this of course is qualifying this is not for wife in general, but qualifying the wife with the word unchaste, that if it is an unchaste wife. So in the previous verses, the fact that the mind is unchaste has already been established. That's why this analogy makes sense, that the mind is unchaste. So given that, what will it do? That it will, if the yogi weakens a little bit, then it will cause its downfall. So Srila Prabhupada says that that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say that in the morning our first business should be beat the mind with shoes 100 times. And before going to bed, beat the mind 100 times with a broomstick. In this way, one's mind can be kept under control. So the beating in the mind is with the shoe, and in the evening is with a broomstick. So generally the beating with the shoe is a little less severe. Both of them are severe, but if one is being beaten with a shoe, then the hurt that is impacted is a little less than being beaten with a broomstick. And that's after all a stick. You beat with it, it's more painful. So in the morning, the one should be strict on the mind that do not deviate during the day. In the night, one should be more strict on the mind, chastising it for all the times that it did deviate during the day. Right. So in the morning, it is like, I know your nature. So I'm telling you this very strictly, that over the day, do not mislead me. So it is more cautionary. But at night, the introspective practitioner will look back during the day and say that these are all the times when my mind misled me. So then the punishment should be more severe. And this should happen every day. So Srila Prabhupada says that when the yogi is controlled by the mind, he falls down into the material condition. One should be very careful of the mind, just as a husband should be careful of an unchaste wife. Right. So these are obviously metaphors being used over here um, uh, to imply the fact that one should be very cautious about the mind. Right. And what is the alternative? Because the mind is such an integral part of the self. So how can you be cautious of what something that defines you? That's when the importance of taking instructions is important, is becomes paramount. That taking instructions from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and this framework is essentially maintained in order to give oneself protection from the mind. Okay, verse 5. Kamo manyormado lobha shokamoha bhayadayaha karma bandhascha yanmula swikuryat kuno tadbuddha.
The mind is a root cause of lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. Combined, these constitute bondage to fruitive activity. What learned man would put faith in the mind?
So the verse elaborates on the point made in the previous verse. Previous verse it said that um, uh, uh, the mind is like an unchaste woman that has paramours on the side, right? So what are these paramours? They are given over here, that lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear, right? And all these, they enter the they enter into the consciousness of the yogi through the mind. And that's why it said the mind is the root cause of all this. And once they enter into the consciousness, then they cause the downfall. So Sukhdev asks this rhetorically, that what learned person would put faith in the mind? Right? When the mind is the cause of all these things like lust, anger, pride, etc., which any practicing spiritualist knows is unfavorable to the practice of devotion, or even unfavorable per se. Why put your trust on the mind? So Prabhupada says that the mind is the original cause of the material bondage. It is followed by many enemies such as anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. The best way to control the mind is to engage it always in Krishna consciousness. Savaimana Krishna Padaravindu. Since the followers of the mind bring about material bondage, we should be very careful not to trust the mind. So this is the concluding verse on the instructions to the mind. So just to summarize it, yeah. So these were given in 3 verses, 3, 4, and 5. So in the third verse, the point was made that the mind is restless, and because it is restless, it can cheat at any moment. So we had discussed that how this restlessness of the mind is what makes it all the more dangerous. If there is a person who is always your enemy, then you can protect yourself against the person. If there is a person who is sometimes your friend and sometimes your enemy, it is very difficult to protect. So when the person is your friend, then the person is helping you a lot, is the cause of happiness, and then you start trusting it, and the person becomes your enemy. And then you become careful about it, and the person becomes your friend again. Right. So this is the most insidious aspect of the mind. And great personalities like Shaubari Rishi and Lord Shiva have been defeated by the mind. Now, again, important to understand here that these are pastimes that were performed by these great personalities. So when Lord Shiva was defeated by the mind, he immediately defeated the mind. So when he was bewildered by Mohini Murti, it was only for a fleeting moment. And then after that, he was completely equipoised. And he was glorifying Krishna, that who other than Krishna can create this disturbance in my mind. So the point he was making was that I am the greatest of the yogis, but Krishna is even greater than me. Right. So the statements are not made to be interpreted that even Lord Shiva is defeated by his mind. So what hope is there for me? Or worse, thinking that I have controlled my mind, so I'm better than Lord Shiva. So they're just past him. Shaubri Rishi also, it took him a longer time. It took him about 100 years. But then he also regained the control of his mind and resumed his practices. So then in the fourth verse, the uh, uh, the reason is explained a little bit more, that why did these exalted personalities fall victim to the mind? So because they are exalted personalities, one can assume that they did not lack control of the mind. Right? So it's not that they were unable to control the mind. The problem was that they trusted the mind. So uh, because they trusted the mind, they gave it an opportunity to cause their downfall. So the distinction between controlling the mind and trusting the mind is made over here. That one should always strive to control the mind. But even when it is controlled, one should not trust it. And of course, when it is uncontrolled, one should absolutely not trust it. And the fifth verse was an elaboration on the fourth verse, that what are the kind of things that an uncontrolled mind does? Right? What are the kind of things that the mind that you put your trust on will do? Right? So 7 things are named: lust, anger, pride, greed, lamentation, illusion, and fear. So this concludes the lesson that one should not trust the mind. So uh, uh, for some more elaboration on this, for instance, Sukadeva Goswami is described as a liberated soul who was always alert to not become a victim of his mind. Right? In the first canto, he's I think in the second canto, I forget where. It is either in the 19th chapter of the first canto or the second. I think it's in the 19th chapter of the first canto. He's described as a liberated soul who was always alert to not become a victim of his mind. Now, if you look at his description, at one point he's described as being liberated. So if he's liberated, why does he have to be alert? He's already beyond the modes. But the understanding is that this is the reason that he is liberated, that he is always alert to not become a victim of his mind. That is the reason that he is liberated. If he is liberated and not alert, then he is not liberated. The mind will cause his downfall. So these instructions of Rishabdev, it said, are even appreciated by the Paramhamsa sannyasi, right? So, so this shows the level of, this shows the 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 exalted level of Rishabdev, right? The level of confidence and self-assurance of of Rishabdev. He is giving instructions to those that are meant for even the most elevated people, the Paramhamsa sannyasis. Yet, when Rishabdev was approached by the mystic siddhis, we'll see that later on, he refused to accept them. Right? Why? Because he was careful not to tempt his mind. Right? So at one now, Rishabdev, of course, is the personality of Godhead. So keeping that aside, the fact that he's giving, he took birth as part of the Leela, and he's giving instructions. So we can understand how exalted a personality he is in this pastime that the Lord is playing, that his instructions are meant for those who are at the topmost level of their renunciation, the Paramhamsa sannyasis. So one can understand he's even at a higher level than them. But even he is, is alert not to fall victim of his mind. How do we know that? Because when he is approached by the mystic siddhis, he refuses to accept them because that would tempt his mind. So after giving these instructions, he himself becomes more cautious of Maya. Right. So a personality at that level. So how much more so for somebody at our level? From a more um, uh, practical perspective, so we may have all noticed this in our lives, or maybe talking to others. So uh, um, there is this uh, Sunday feast lecture aura effect, right? So when a devotee gives uh, 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 a class, then initially they say that the most difficult part is preparing to give the class, especially Sunday feast, because your audience is mixed. There are people who have been coming from 40 years, there are newcomers, there are Prabhupada disciples sitting in the crowd, there are the people who are barely familiar with Krishna. So, this say that preparing for the class is difficult. But actually, the most difficult part is after you give the class. Why? Because one needs there's devotees by nature are magnanimous. They're generous. And even people who come to the temple, they may not be practicing devotees, they're generous. So you're standing in the prasadam line, they will stand by you, Prabhuji, that was an excellent class. So they say, this is one of the best classes I heard. That is the most dangerous part. Because after you hear it sufficiently from people that you respect, you start to believe in it. So it does not mean that you reject their appreciation. What it means is that you accept it with humility. What it means is that you distrust your mind when it tells you that all this appreciation means that you have become very exalted or advanced. Right. So that part is when you say, I am distrusting my mind. But you can accept that appreciation in the mood of humility, saying that even though I did not deserve this, the persons were kind enough to give it to me. So thank you for it. Or you can accept it in the mood that behind every appreciation, like they say that behind every complaint is a compliment, and behind every compliment is an expectation. So when somebody comes and says that I really liked how you summarize the points in the lecture. So in your mind, you can take it as an instruction that this person is instructing me that it is good to summarize the points in the class, right? That's another way of taking it. And the third way of taking it is that consider this as an empowerment of what you have received from your Guru Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, your Shiksha Gurus, that even though I did not have sufficiently good qualities to give the class, but somehow I've been able to connect to the audience. It is because I have my Guru Maharaj has been merciful, or Srila Prabhupada has been merciful. That way, the mind that was trying to pull us down, now we can become our friend. We can use it to increase our humility or take instructions or increase our surrender to the parampara. Okay, so enough about the mind. This, of course, is a whole seminar in itself. Like I said, there was a 3-day seminar on Mana Shiksha at the Potomac Temple. So it was all about how the mind has a mind of its own. Moving on to verse 6. So this is prose. Shang Prabhu, if you can simply read the translation.
Lord Rishabhadev was a head of all kings and emperors within this universe, but assuming the dress and language of an avaduta, he acted as if dull and materially bound. Consequently, no one could observe his divine opulence. He adopted this behavior just to teach yogis how to give up the body. Nonetheless, he maintained his original position as a planetary expansion of Lord Vasudeva, Krishna. Remaining always in that state, he gave up his pastime as Lord Rishabhadev within the material world. If, following in his footsteps of Lord Rishabhadev, one can give up his subtle body, there is no chance that one will accept a material body again.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me? Okay. I just realized that this is also going on the Facebook. So when you're speaking, it's going on to my headphone, but nothing is going on the recording. So I'm going to try and speak a little louder and keep it. But if you can't hear me, let me know. So 3 verses, 6, 7, and 8, they talk about the disappearance of Rishabhadev. Right. So having Vishwanath Chakravarti says that this topic of why Rishabhadev did not accept mystic powers, he describes it as an incidental topic, in the sense that it relates to the main topic, but not part of it. So what he was discussing was the activities and the glories of Rishabhadev. So Vishwanath Chakravarti says, having done with the incidental topic of why Rishabhadev did not welcome mystic powers, now Sukdev Goswami returns to the main topic. So the main topic, the main teaching of Rishabhadev is at this stage. So he had given instructions. Now at this stage, his main teaching is how to leave, how to depart. So Rishabhadev teaches how to give up the body by actually giving up his own body. So this is an important point, because earlier on we had established that Rishabhadev was completely, is the personality of Godhead. So there is no difference between his body and his soul. They're all spiritual. So his body is fully spiritual. Vishwanath Chakravarti says he sees himself completely in a spiritual perspective. So what does it mean that he gave up his body? And that part is explained a little bit with Vishwanath Chakravarti. He says that because Rishabhadev was the personality of Godhead, he considered himself non-different from Paramatma. So, considering himself to be Paramatma, the body of the Paramatma is this material universe. So, as we know, when we did the Sarga and Visarga, so we said that how the creation happens, and at every stage in the creation, there is a soul and the super soul. So for the whole material creation, there is Karnodakshay, Vishnu. For each of the individual universes, there is Garbhodakshay Vishnu, who is considered as the super soul, and Brahma is considered as the soul, and the material universe is considered to be the body. So when it is said that Rishabdev gave up his body, one can understand that he gave up his association with the material world, right? So, Vishwanath Chakravarti said, imitating the conduct of an Avadhuta, he gave up his pastimes as an avatar. Desiring to give up his body means that he desired to give up the manifestation of his body, which is this material universe. This will be explained more in the next verse. Srila Prabhupada, he uses this as a preaching point and explains that even a devotee can accomplish the same thing. He says that this is possible simply by keeping oneself as an eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. One must understand his constitutional position and the constitutional position of the Supreme Lord as well, right? So what the Prabhupada is saying, that what can the devotee achieve? The last line of the verse, where it is said that if following in the footsteps of Lord Rishabdev, one can give up his subtle body, there is no chance that one will accept a material body again, right? So here Prabhupada is not talking about reincarnation, right? That is just giving up the material body and accepting another material body. But liberation is giving up both the material and the subtle body. So when one follows the footsteps of Lord Rishabdev, then one gives up both the gross and subtle body, which is the same as saying that one does not take birth again in the material world, and one is liberated, and one becomes situated in the possession. So Prabhupada here is taking the devotional angle. I mean, this can also be achieved through liberation, through Brahman liberation. Prabhupada is taking the spiritual, the devotional angle here, which is what was established also by Rishabdev. Later on also he'll establish that as the superior path, that by becoming a devotee of the Lord, by being situated in one's position with respect to the Lord, one gets reinstated in one's Nitya Swarup, gives her the gross and subtle body, and there's no need to take birth again. Okay. Verse 7, if you can read, Prabhu.
Actually, Lord Rishabdev has no material body, but due to Yoga Maya, he considered his body material, and therefore, because he played like an ordinary human being, he gave up the mentality of identifying with it. Following this principle, he began to wander all over the world. While traveling, he came to the province of Karnataka in south of India and passed through Kona, Venka, and Kutaka. He had no plan to travel this way, but he arrived near Kutakachala and entered a forest there. He placed a stone within his mouth and began to wander through the forest, naked and with his hair disheveled like a madman.
So the verse describes how Lord Rishabdev gave up his body So though he was the Supreme Lord, the word Muktalingasya is used over here. So Muktalingasya can be interpreted two ways. Muktalingasya means that though he was the Supreme Lord, he gave up the characteristics of the Supreme Lord, which means that he was playing the pastime of a jiva. Muktalingasya also means that he had the characteristics of a liberated soul. Right, so slight differences, but does not change the essential meaning of the verse. One point may be asked over here that if Rishabdev gave up Muktalingasya, which means if he became liberated, right? Why did he do what he did, which is travel to the province of Karnataka, Konka, Venka, etc.? There was no need for him to do that. And this is explained by the analogy. Vishnu Chakravarti explains this by the analogy of the potter wheel. That when a potter is rotating the wheel to make a pot on it, so they generally have a stick and they put it on one of the side. There's a hole in the pot in the wheel, and they'll rotate the wheel very quickly. And then after that, they'll put the stick away and then start making the pot. So the potter wheel is actually rotating even without the potter pushing it. Why? Because of the earlier push that the potter gave it. Prabhupada would give the example of the fan, that you switch on the fan, there's no power going in it, but the fan will still move for some time. So similarly, even though Rishabdev was fully liberated, he gave the appearance of continuing to identify with the body. So so this has a more general implication, that sometimes we say that this person is fully liberated, and then immediately the question is asked, if the person is liberated, why does he have a material body? Because the material body is the sign of prarabdha karma, like it's the sign of material desires or sense. So this is an understanding that because of the past impressions, the body continues with the soul, and since the soul now has the body, it simply uses it in the service of Krishna. In fact, that is the reason why the soul is allowed to continue with the body. That is the reason why personalities that get liberated preach extensively, because essentially they are now at this point where they realize that the only reason I have this body is because I have to do some service with it. Now, even in this case, Rishabdev is different. So this is the case of Jivan Muktas, the people who become liberated in their very body. Rishabdev was always liberated, right? He was always under the influence of Yogamaya, right? So he never had any past impressions. He never had any. His body was never created because of past karma, that it might continue under those impressions, but he acted like that just to demonstrate the conduct of an avaduta. Because he was playing the part of a yogi, he continued to play it to the very end. Right? So what did he do? He wandered all over the earth, and wandering, he reached the southern state of Karnataka. And in that state, he passed through different provinces, Konka, Venka, and Kutak. Finally, he reached the province of Kutakcha by his own will. It said that he moved with his hair disheveled like a madman and a stone in his mouth. So it's explained that the stone in the mouth means that he had a childlike personality. Children have this tendency, especially if they're at that age, between, like, they're under 2 years, anything that comes in their grasp, they put it in their mouth. So this just points to the childlike mentality of Rishabdev, that even a stone, he put it in his mouth. Okay, next verse.
While he was wandering about, a wild forest fire began. This fire was caused by the friction of bamboos which were being blown by the wind. In that fire, the entire forest near Kutakachala and the body of Rishabdev was burned to ashes.
So in the previous verse, it mentioned that Rishabdev disappeared. This verse talks about how did this happen? What was the event? So the fire burned up the forest along with Rishabdev. It not only burnt up Rishabdev, the fire also burnt up the trees and the animals in the forest. So Jiva Goswami, commenting on this verse, he analyzes the Sanskrit of the verse to show that the translation of this verse should be read as Rishabdev accompanied the forest fire. So he picks on this term Sahatena Dadaha, right? And he says that one may say that the father came with the son. That does not mean that the father accompanied the son. The father is the principal agent. The son was accompanying the father. Similarly, here when it is mentioned that Rishabdev and the fire came together, the fire is not the principal agent. It's the supporting agent. Rishabdev is the primary agent, which is another way of saying that by the will of Lord Rishabdev, the fire came. He was not a victim of the fire. It's not that he was in the forest and the fire was there and it burnt him, but by his will, the fire accompanied him. Right? And Sahatena Dadaha also means that Rishabdev accompanied the forest fire in burning the trees and the animals. So again, Jiva Goswami explains that one should not take this word, this phrase to mean that Rishabdev assisted the forest fire or was burnt by the forest fire. So he did not assist the forest fire in burning the animals, or he himself was burned by the fire. What it actually means is that the forest fire that was created by Rishabdev, it burnt away the gross bodies of the animals and the plants. So when you see the statement that Rishabdev accompanied the forest fire, then if the forest fire burnt away the gross body, what did Rishabdev do? So Rishabdev, he burned the subtle body. Right? So by the mercy of Rishabdev, those who were present over there also got liberation. And so two important points made here, that the fire was caused by the will of Rishabdev. He was not a victim of the fire. And in fact, he accompanied the fire in mercifully bestowing liberation on the animals and the trees. So what was their qualification? Their only qualification was that they were fortuitously there when Lord Rishabdev was there. They were the object of his causeless mercy. And Jiva Goswami, as usual, he does things very scientifically. So he says that if one was to say that the fire burned Rishabdev, that will contradict the previous statements when it is said idam shariram mama durvyam, that my body is fully spiritual, right? And he says that one may, when one is told this reason as an explanation of why the fire could not burn Rishabdev, then in the 6th verse, the person might say that you are saying that Rishabhadev's body is fully spiritual, but in the 6th verse, it is said that Rishabhadev desired to give up his body, right? And Jiva Goswami, he addresses that doubt to the doubt, saying that Kalevar, that even if it is considered to refer to the body, giving up of the body does not mean that the body is material, right? So he makes the final thing that, okay, fine, you're not accepting anything I'm saying, then at least you can accept this, that just because a person is giving up the body does not mean that the body is material. So we see Jiva Goswami works in this way, that he creates a premise, supports it, then he goes to the other position and argues against himself, right? And then he defeats that argument, and then he will go again and contradict that point. So in this way, he gives a complete explanation. And what I'm giving here is just a glimpse of it. I'm sure what actually is much more, but this is just a high-level summary. Prabhupada in the purport makes a similar point that this burning was external, and factually the Lord's body never burned. Right? Prabhupada says that such a forest fire can burn external bodies of animals, but Lord Rishabhdev was not burned, although he apparently seems so. Lord Rishabhdev is a super soul of all living entities within the forest, and his soul is never burned by fire. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Adayoyam, the soul is never burned by fire. Due to Lord Rishabhdev's presence, all the animals in the forest were also liberated from material engagement. Okay, so this was the conclusion of Lord Rishabhdev's pastime. So here he has left his wound up his pastime. The next set of verses talk about the false religion that is created by a follower, an apparent follower of Rishabhdev. Before we go there, I'll take a pause and see if there is any comments or discussion.
Yeah, just if we read it literally, Prabhu, that he was burned like this, it looked like to be very strange, like to accept something like that. But if you look at with the eyes of the acharyas, it's completely changed our understanding.
And I think that's why Srila Prabhupada and Jiva Goswami, they go the extra mile in trying to disambiguate that notion, right? That he had a material body, that he was a victim of the forest fire. And one of the reasons they do is, as we'll see later on, is because of the false followers of Rishabhdev. Right? So they want to make sure that one understands Rishabhdev is the personality of Godhead, right? And everything that he did was in that context, that is the personality of Godhead. One should take instructions and not imitate, or one should imitate what is meant to be imitated. Right? So one should be careful about these two.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Just regarding the mind, not to fall for the mind, and you mentioned some of the enemies of the or paramours of the mind, actually. But in case of Bharat Maharaj, we can also say that he fell for the mind, right? Like being compassionate to a deer and fell for the mind. So there, these qualities, 7 qualities, is not one of the compassion is not one of those 7 qualities there. So how to understand that? Is it lamentation can be offshoot of that? And one of the 7 qualities that you mentioned, lamentation is one of that, I guess. Right.
In Bharat Maharaj's case, the quality that he fell victim was pride.
Oh, pride.
So he had this notion that I am the one that is protecting this deer.
Oh,
if I am
nice.
not there, the deer will die. I am the cause of his living, etc. So there was this traces of pride that became more prominent, and that's why it
Oh.
caused.
Okay. 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 That makes sense.
That's one of
Thank
the dangers of charity, actually. That giving, even in the mode of goodness, when you give in charity, then one has to be very careful about pride. In one of the sampradayas, I think it is the Madhav Sampradaya, I believe, where they have this, it's almost like an injunction that whenever you give something, you should give by, instead of giving like this, you should give like this.
Yeah.
Because when you give like this, there is this sense of superiority that I'm giving and you're taking. If you do like this, then you're offering and the person is taking your offering, right? So just to, I mean, it's just a gesture, but it kind of helps reinforce that notion.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu.
Even in the yajna, you have to put your fire, your ingredient in the fire like this, not like this.
Good point. When you do yagya, then the priest will always say that you offer like this. Right? So sometimes physical gestures, they kind of feed this frame of mind, or vice versa. The frame of mind, they kind of determine how your body activities are. Okay, so moving on to verse 9, which basically 4 verses talk about the false followers of Rishabdev. So Prabhu, if you can read the translation.
Sukadev Goswami continued, speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, my dear king, the king of Konka, Venkat, and Kutaka, whose name was Harat, heard the activities of Rishabhadev and imitating Rishabhadev principle, introduced a new system of religion. Taking advantage of Kali Yuga, the age of sinful activity, King Harat, being bewildered, gave up the Vedic principle, which are free from race, and concocted a new system of religion opposed to the Vedas. That was the beginning of the Jain Dharma. Many other so-called religions followed this atheistic system.
So, so obviously you can understand that this is now, Sukdev Goswami is talking about events that will happen in the future, because Rishabdev appeared in the Satyog, and Sukdev Goswami is speaking towards the end of the Dwapar Yuga. So all these events have still not happened, but he's speaking about future events. And the reason he's speaking it is specifically because the Bhagavatam is, he knows the Bhagavatam is meant for, especially meant for the people in the age of Kali. And the warning is there that Lord Rishabdev performed all these activities. In the other ages, one could aspire to imitate his behavior, not in the age of Kali. Because in the age of Kali, the jivas, they are incapable of emulating or appreciating. So emulating means that they're incapable of doing what Rishabdev did. And appreciating means that without understanding his intentions, they will not be able to appreciate his activities. So as a note of caution, he's giving the example of King Arahat. So King Arahat is born millions of years later on from Rishabdev's time and thousands of years from Sukadeva Goswami's time. So he's born. He's born, and in the Kali Yuga, he hears about the pastimes of Rishabdev. And what does he think? That if I do what Rishabdev did, I will become Rishabdev. I'll become like Rishabdev. Right? So it is said that he was bewildered by the impiety of the age. And because of that, he created a false religion. And as Prabhupada says, that is Jainism. So for just a little bit of context, it should be noted that the current day followers of Jainism, they consider, so they have what are known as Tirthankaras. Tirthankaras, so there are 24 Tirthankaras, and they consider Rishabdev to be the first Tirthankara. So they consider Rishabdev to be the founder of Jainism. And Mahavir, who is generally by more casual observers, he's considered to be the last of the Tirthankara, the 24th Tirthankara. So it's not that Mahavir founded Jainism. Like they say that Jainism was founded by Rishabdev, and then they have a disciplic succession of 24 Tirthankaras coming down to Mahavir, and Mahavir was the last one who was the preceptor in this succession. Now, interestingly, the 22nd Tirthankara, his name is Neminath, also known as Arishtanemi. And in the Jain scripture, he is described as a cousin of Lord Krishna. So his father of Neminath, is the brother of Vasudeva. Right, and Neminath was the youngest son. So the father's name was Samudra Vijay, and his wife's name was Shiva Devi. So they were in the Yaduvanshi, obviously, because they were brothers. Samudra Vijay was a brother of Lord Vasudeva. So they consider Neminath to be the cousin of Krishna. And in Jain pastimes, it is described that Neminath was in many ways superior to Krishna. So they talk about how he heard about Krishna fighting with Kamsa and defeating him. And people were very much glorifying that Krishna is so powerful that he defeated Kamsa. So then Neminath was curious, and he came and he challenged Krishna to a wrestling match, and he easily defeated Krishna. And there are other pastimes also where it's mentioned that how he took Krishna's Sudarshan Chakra on the toe of his foot, etc., etc. So Srila Prabhupada notes that this is similar to the mentality of Pondrak. So Pondrak, he stuck a couple of hands on his back, and he got a discus on his finger, and he said that he is Krishna. So similarly, King Arahat, just by imitating the external symptoms, he started considering himself the same. And that is essentially the sign of one who is misleading. Okay, moving on. Next verse, Prabhu.
People who are lowest among men and bewildered by the illusory energy of the Supreme Lord will give up the original Varnashram Dharma and its rules and regulations. They will abandon bathing 3 times daily and worshipping the Lord. Abandoning cleanliness and neglecting the Supreme Lord, they will accept nonsensical principles. Not regularly bathing or washing their mouths regularly, they will always remain unclean, and they will pluck out their hair. Following a concocted religion, they will flourish. During this age of Kali, people are more inclined to religious system. Consequently, these people will naturally deride Vedic authority. The followers of Vedic authority, the Brahmanas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the devotees.
So Sukadeva Goswami describes the symptoms of these people, and to some extent is condemning them because of why they do it. But more importantly, also he's describing it as a cautionary tool. Note that do not get misled by such practices that of emulating the symptoms without understanding the cause. Right. So we have that even amongst those who are following the Bhakti mark, right? The sages, they emulate the symptoms without having the cause. So when one is very much advanced in Bhakti, then they become avadut. Or one is even more advanced, then they become completely mad in ecstasy. Right. So they may, like Mahaprabhu in his Antalila, he displayed it. But the symptoms are as a byproduct of their absorption in Bhakti. And whereas what people might do is they might emulate the symptoms, trying to either attract attention or adoration or just out of foolishness. So some of the things that I mentioned over here, abandoning cleanliness, neglecting the Supreme Lord, the Jains are essentially, their Jainism mostly atheistic. They will accept nonsensical principles, not regularly breathing or washing their mouths regularly, they will remain unclean. They will pluck out their hair. So one of the things in Jainism is giving extreme pain to the body, whether it is in terms of what you eat or like pulling out the hair and other forms. So in their philosophy, by giving extreme pain to the body, you begin to understand that you're not the body. Right. Whereas from a devotional perspective, by understanding first that you are the soul and then you're an eternal servant of Krishna, the fact that you're not the body automatically appears. And then Sukadeva Goswami warns that they will flourish during this age of Kali because people are naturally inclined to irreligious systems. Like one might say, Rishi Maharaj might say, that who will follow all this nonsense? And Sukadeva Goswami says there will be many followers because people in the age of Kali are inclined to irreligious symptoms. And in the purport, I found it to be little humorous. Prabhupada talks about the hippies. He says that presently the hippies in the Western country fits this description. They are irresponsible and unregulated. They do not bathe and they deride standard Vedic knowledge. They concoct new lifestyle and religions. There are many hippie groups at the present moment, but they all originated from King Arahat, who imitated the activities of Lord Rishabdev, who is situated on the Paramhamsa stage. King Arahat did not care for the fact that although Lord Rishabdev acted like a madman, his stool and urine were nonetheless aromatic. So much so that they nicely scented the countryside for miles around. The followers of King Arahat went under the name Jains, and they were later followed by many others, particularly the hippies, who are more or less offshoots of Mayavad philosophy, because they think themselves as the personality of Godhead. Such people do not respect the real followers of Vedic principles, the idle Brahmanas, nor do they have respect for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Brahman. Due to the influence of the age of Kali, they are apt to concoct false religious systems. Okay. Next verse.
Low-class people, due to their gross ignorance, introduce a system of religion that deviates from the Vedic principles. Following their own mental concoctions, they automatically fall down into the darkness region of existence.
So in the previous verse and this verse, the symptoms of the imitators are given. So what are the symptoms given? One is that they will abandon varnashrama. Right. So, along with varnashram is the varnashram dharma. Right. So, what is varnashram dharma? Which is injunctions of what to do and what not to do. So they will give a varnashram dharma, which means that they will act whimsically. They will not take bath, they will not do achman, they will not be clean, they will not worship the deity. So they will abandon varnashram dharma. Second is that they will accept a concocted religion, like plucking out their hair and nails and eating, not eating, depending on various rules and regulations. So they will accept all these concoctions. Third is that they will deride the Vedas and the Brahmanas. They will deride the Supreme Lord and his devotees. Fourth is that they will follow the disciplic succession of the blind, Andha Parampara. Right? One is the Parampara. The Andha Parampara is where one blind person is followed by another blind person, is followed by another blind person. So they will follow a disciplic succession, but it will be the Andha Parampara. And the fifth is the result, that they will fall down in the darkest regions of existence. So Prabhupada says that in this connection, one can read 16:16 and 16:23 of Bhagavad Gita. So this is in the chapter Divine and Demoniac Natures. So in 16:16, Krishna says that about the demoniac people, that they are perplexed by the various anxieties and bound by a network of illusions. They become too strongly attached to sense enjoyment and fall down into hell. And in 16:23, it talks about he who discards scriptural injunctions and acts according to his own whims attains neither perfection nor happiness nor the supreme destination. Okay, moving on to verse 12.
In this age of Kali, people are overwhelmed by the modes of passion and ignorance. Lord Rishabhadev incarnated himself to deliver them from the clutches of Maya.
So the teachings of Lord Rishabhadev are meant for the benefit of everyone. In the earlier ages, the teachings were meant to be heard and followed. Right. So if you look at the teachings of the Lord, he prominently gave Gyan Marg. Right. He came to teach Gyan Yoga. Right. And those teachings, so it is said that Rajas Papluta, so Vishwanath Chakravarti says that Rajas Papluta can mean that the teachings were lost due to the influence of time, or Rajas Papluta can also mean that the teachings were lost because the people were overwhelmed with Rajagun by the mode of passion. So the point that is made that in the earlier yugas, in the Satyug, Treta Yuga and Dwapar Yuga, the people were sufficiently beyond this mode to be able to follow it. But for the people in the age of Kali, the teachings are only meant to be heard, not followed. And later on, we'll see in the Falstuti why simply by hearing the pastimes of Rishabhadev, in the age of Kali, people can get liberated. Right? So doesn't mean that it becomes irrelevant. It is as irrelevant, but it is more potent. In the earlier ages, one had to hear and follow. Now in the age of Kali, one has to simply hear with faith and one gets to the same destination. So one may question that how when the statement is made that Rishabhadev incarnated to deliver the people of Kali, how can one understand that? If Sukadeva Goswami is saying that the instructions are not meant for the people in the age of Kali. So Prabhupada explains this. He says that Jains refer to Lord Rishabdev as the original perceptor. If such people are serious followers of Rishabdev, they must also take his instructions. In the 5th chapter of this canto, Rishabdev gave his 100 sons instructions whereby they could become free from the clutches of Maya. If one actually follows Rishabdev, he will certainly be delivered from the clutches of Maya and return back home, back to Godhead. If one strictly follows the instructions of Rishabdev given in the 5th chapter, he will certainly be liberated. Right? So, 3 points in unwrapping this. How do we understand this? That by hearing and understanding these instructions, the people in the age of Kali should realize that they are not meant to be followed in the present age. Now, if one was to hear the instructions with faith, then one will also understand that Rishabdev gave instructions on the process of bhakti. And so he went over this yoga ladder and he put bhakti at the pinnacle. Right? So the bhakti mark was glorified as superior by Rishabdev. So instead of trying to follow the karni of Rishabdev, the instruction is to follow the katha, the speech. Now that is always the instruction, any age, that one should only follow the karni after the katha. One should only follow the activities after the instructions. But in the age of Kali, it is said that just by following the instructions, one can attain perfection. So 2 reasons are given in this verse. The 3rd reason is given in the next verse. So the 2 reasons are, one is that by understanding the instruction, one should realize that they're not meant to be followed. And the second is, by understanding this instruction, one should understand about the superiority of bhakti. Right? So now let's look at the 3rd instruction in the 13th verse.
Learned scholar chant about the transcendental qualities of Lord Rishabdev in this way. Oh, this earthly planet contains 7 seas and many islands and lands, of which Bharatvarsha is considered the most pious. People of Bharatvarsha are accustomed to glorifying the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his incarnation as Lord Rishabdev and others. All these activities are very auspicious for the welfare of humanity.
So the previous verse spoke about the limitation of the ability of the people in the age of Kali to emulate Lord Rishabdev. Right? So because of that, the recommendation is to simply hear. This verse talks about the potency of hearing. That simply by hearing with faith and repeating what has been heard, Shravana Kirtan, all auspiciousness is achieved. Right? So this is essentially glorifying the process of Shravan and Kirtan, especially in the age of Kali. Now, in this verse, you will see that Sukadev Goswami, he says that he talks especially about Bharatvarsha. Right? He says that people in Bharatvarsha are accustomed to glorifying the activities of the Lord. Of all the places, Bharatvarsha is considered to be the most pious, and Prabhupada expands on it. So he says that the word Adipunyam, so the word Adipunyam is used for the residents of Bharatvarsha. So there may be pious people elsewhere in the world, but people in the Bharatvarsha, they're Adipunyam. They're even more pious, or most pious. Why is that? Prabhupada explains that throughout the world, there is no question of Bhagavad Bhakti or devotional service. But the people of Bharatvarsha can understand the devotional service of the Lord. Right? So that is a characteristic of that is unique to the residents of Bharatvarsha. So there is piety everywhere else also. In some cases, the piety is mode of goodness. Some cases, the piety may go all the way to liberation. But in Bharatvarsha, the unique trait is that bhakti is understood. So how does that result in piety? Prabhupada says that because they understand Bhagavad Bhakti, they can do two things. They can practice bhakti and they can preach bhakti. And because of that, they attain perfection. So, and if you refer back to our discussion on 425.13, there is a collection of maybe a dozen verses that talk about two things: the glories of the age of Kali and the special benediction of the residents of Bharatvarsha. So for those who are in Bharatvarsha in the age of Kali, one has the best of the best, right? So the opportunity to make advancement is most prominent. Okay, verse 14.
Oh, what shall I say of the dynasty of Priyavrata, which is pure and very much celebrated? In that dynasty, the Supreme Person, the original person of Godhead, descended as an incarnation and executed religious principles that could free one from the result of fruitive activity.
So, so as we know, now the pastime of Rishabdev is winding down. Sukadeva Goswami takes a step back and now is glorifying the dynasty of Priyavrata. He says, Aho nu Vamsho. So Aho means what a surprise. It's exclamation with surprise. So he says, Aho Vato Vamsho, that it's so surprising that this dynasty of Prithu has been glorified by the presence of Rishabdev. I mean the dynasty of Priyavrata, sorry, not Prithu. So Srila Prabhupada says that there are many dynasties wherein the personality of Godhead appears. This is the Yaduvanshi, the Raghuvanshi, and similarly Lord Rishabdev appeared in the dynasty of King Priyavrata. And they became famous because of the presence of the Lord. Right. So in addition to the presence of the Lord himself, the dynasty of Priyavrata is also famous because of the presence of devotees. Right. So there is King Nabi, there is Bharat Maharaj, there is Navyogendras. Right. So both the Lord and exalted devotees, they are like stars in the dynasty of Priyavrata. Okay, verse 15.
Who is that mystic yogi who can follow the example of Lord Rishabhadev, even with his mind? Lord Rishabhadev rejected all kinds of yogic perfection, which other yogis hanker to attain. Who is that yogi who can compare to Lord Rishabhadev?
Okay. So I'll end with this verse. I was thinking of ending the chapter, but this chapter is 19 verses, and after that we have 4 more verses. So we'll do it next time and then start the next chapter. So this continues with the glorification of Lord Rishabdev. That amongst the yogis, Lord Rishabdev is the most auspicious. That his perfection, it can be seen by the fact that how exalted is Rishabdev, and that the yogis cannot even follow him in mind, much less in action. Right. So where do the yogis are not able to follow him? that when the yogis follow the practice outlined by Rishabdev, they become attracted to the siddhis. But Rishabdev, he rejected the siddhis. So the difference between Rishabdev and yogis is that the yogis, they aspire for the siddhis. In case of Rishabdev, the siddhis aspired for Rishabdev. In case of the yogis, they aspire for the siddhis and the siddhis reject them. In case of Rishabdev, the siddhis aspired for Rishabdev and he rejected them. And so his position is so exalted, right? So this notion, this phrase that that the yogis cannot follow the example of Lord Rishabdev even in his mind. So it's used in two other places in the Bhagavatam. One is later on we will see that when Sukdev Goswami talks about the renunciation of Bharat Maharaj, he says one cannot even in his mind imitate the renunciation of Bharat Maharaj. And then later on in the 10th canto also, Sukdev Goswami says that one cannot in the mind try to imitate the Rasa Leela pastimes of Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada says that generally yogis desire the yogic perfections of Anima, Lagima, Mahima, Prakamya, Prapti, Ishtiva, Vashitva, Kama, Sivita. So these are the Ashtasiddhis. Lord Rishabdev, however, never aspired for all these material things. Such siddhis perfections are presented by the illusory energy of the Lord. The real purpose of the yoga system is to achieve the favor and shelter of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead. But this purpose is covered by the illusory energy of Yogamaya. The Prabhupada uses the words very carefully, right? So the Lord is always covered by Yogamaya, right? But here Prabhupada says that the purpose is covered by the illusory energy of Yogamaya. So the Lord's own energy, right? So it's always Yogamaya as far as the Lord is concerned. Even when it is covering and bewildering, it is not covering or bewildering the Lord, right? So for him, it is always Yogamaya. Prabhupada then says, so-called yogis are therefore allured by the superficial material benedictions of all these siddhis. Consequently, they cannot compare to Lord Rishabdev, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so let me pause over here and see if there is any discussion about this section or any of the previous things that we have discussed.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I might have misunderstood this section, so I'm seeking clarification. So one of the things you kept saying was, the Karni and Kar Katha. So in this case, we don't do the Karni, meaning we don't follow his activities, but we follow his instructions, the Katha. Is that right?
We appreciate his Katha, right? So just by, this will appear in the first Stuti, that simply by hearing the pastime of Lord Rishabdev, simply by repeating it to others, in the age of Kali, people will attain perfection.
Okay. Because I was thinking, contrastingly, we talk about how Acharya means to follow, like one whose Achar and Prachar is in line, right? Like so we do what we say and we say what we do, that kind of a thing. And here it seems he is just so exalted that it's just, so the way to understand it is that his actions are so exalted that it's just not possible for fallen people like us to follow. Is that how we take it then?
Absolutely. And we see that in other contexts also, right? When we see Krishna's pastimes, they're not meant to be followed. They're meant to be appreciated. Right? So there are when we look at the pastimes of Lord Ram, they're meant to be followed. Like I said that Lord Ram's Karni and Lord Krishna's Kathni. The activities of Lord Ram and the instructions of Lord Krishna should be followed. So that discrimination should be there. And because the personality of Godhead is doing it, there are things that we should understand that he's doing it for us to follow by example. And there are things that he does it simply to show his divinity, right? And when he's saying, then those are the things that that are meant for us to understand and follow. And Lord Rishabdev comes in a little bit of a unique situation that his activities are meant to be followed by people in the earlier yugas, but not in the current yugas. But the destination is the same. And what the people in the earlier yuga would achieve by emulating his actions, people in the age of Kali can achieve that simply by hearing about his pastimes.
Okay, thank you.
One thing, Prabhu, Lord Ram took some vow, not vow, but thinking about the sages and all that. And Krishna, even to break rules, he does it to please the devotees of Lord Ram.
That's correct, Prabhu.
Yeah, and then one more thing about the Jain. They are vegetarian, they don't eat onion and garlic and all that. They're doing something good, at least.
I think the thing that negates a lot of activities that is done is the reason behind the activities, right? So one would rather be a meat eater and a devotee than be a vegetarian and a non-devotee, right? So just being a vegetarian is good but not good enough.
Prabhu, I just to be sure about Jain, they don't believe in any form of like Ram or Krishna, nothing like that. I'm not too familiar with the Jain.
I am not. So Mahavir was a contemporary of Gautam Buddha. They appeared around the same time. And they both preached atheistic philosophy. So Lord Buddha preached Shunyavadi. And from my understanding is Mahavir Jain, he preached some kind of liberation. I myself am not too familiar with it, but he preached some kind of liberation.
Yeah, but because you said something very important, better to be a meat eater, but be favorable to Krishna, Ram, and all that, rather than being vegetarian and like offend the personality of Godhead in another way.
Right. Prabhupada made the statement once that somebody said, I'm a strict vegetarian. And Prabhupada said, even pigeons are vegetarians. What's the big deal about it? Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts, comments?
I have one more question, Prabhu. In that, when you were discussing text 12 and 13, you were saying there were some 3 points in that same context when you were talking about the Karni and the Katha. And I got interrupted by my son, so I didn't figure out what were the 3 points you said that time. If you have it as a note somewhere.
I do have it. Let me read out the points to you. So the first point is that the instructions of Rishabdev are meant to be heard and not followed in the age of Kali. So this is referring to the instructions about the practice of yoga. The second point is that if the instructions regarding Gyan Marg is not feasible, then one should follow the process of, one should follow the instructions of Rishabdev and understand that he is glorifying the superiority of Bhakti. And so second instruction essentially is that Bhakti is superior. These 2 points are in verse 12. And the third point is, so the corollary would be that why did Lord Rishabhdev do all this? That's where the third point comes. He did all this because simply by hearing about his pastimes and repeating them, one can become perfect. So these are the 3 points. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, then we'll end. Wednesday we should finish this chapter and start the next one. Most of the chapters are not very big. I mean, they tend to be a little dense, but limited number of verses. Okay, so we'll end here. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anant Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.